Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Want to know the real details on Joe Biden's inflation salvation, or why the political left is seeking to ban opponents from running for office? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We have a packed show for you today, talking Biden's plan for inflation, a special signature Say What segment. We talk Andy Warhol and the record-breaking price tag, and why Democrats seem to hate democracy. All this and so much more. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Hastings, Michigan on WBCH 1220 AM and 93.1 FM. Thank you for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows that will whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. So without further ado, let's get started. President Biden has launched what he hopes to be both a cure for inflation and a winning ticket for the 2022 midterms. But can his proposals really save a party that is overseeing what is arguably the worst financial crisis in a generation? Well, to help us pass the leverage from the lunacy, we're joined by economics correspondent and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Biden's elusive dreams and schemes, what were the high points and the low points?
Well, were there any high points in that press conference? I don't necessarily think so. The whole plan, the whole press conference was superfluous because it just reiterated everything that he supported or proposed over the last year. You know, he wants to release oil from the strategic reserves. He wants to have price controls for pharmaceuticals. He wants to give households energy tax credits to save money. So nothing was really new from that, except the fact that he says now that he can taste the frustration of the American people when it comes to inflation. What you're saying is that Biden's plan to cure Bidenomics is more Bidenomics. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing too about but it's funny. I wrote about this in one of my recent articles talking about how intervention begets intervention. So Bidenomics was a contributing factor to his inflationary environment. And what does he want to do? Add more to the problem. And then when these problems fester, and let's say he miraculously cures inflation, then you have to have more intervention to solve those other interventionist problems. I mean, that's just basic. That's not Bidenomics. That's Swamponomics, as I
Swamponomics, which is an aptly named TV show that Andrew Moran produces every week on LibertyNation.com. Well worth a visit. Now, can you give us a brief Cliff Notes version of the billionaire tax and the unrealized gains on billionaires' cash tax?
Yeah, so it's pretty much a two-pronged thing. So you have this 20% tax on households earning earning $100 million, more than $100 million a year, and you have two things there. So you have a 20% tax on the full wage income, or you have a tax on partially on your earns income and unrealized capital gains. And if you don't meet that 20%, then there's a top-up, so you pay even more on the new minimum. So this billionaire's tax, I mean, they say that they're going to generate about $360 billion in tax revenue. But that's nothing because that's over a 10-year span. So if you have $14 trillion in deficits, you're having $360 billion in new revenue. What's that? It's nothing.
Well, they have to pay for the money they've sent to Ukraine. Let's dig a little bit deeper into these so-called billionaire tax and unrealized gain taxes. I have two questions actually on this. First, as you and I have discussed before, income tax, when it came into being, was only ever meant for the ultra-wealthy. And yet here we are today with every person having to pay income tax. Now, will this tax sold exclusively as something just for billionaires, will it just stay that way? Or will it, as we've seen time and time again, come down and basically hit everybody eventually?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my answer hasn't changed from the last time we discussed this. I mean, it's a slippery slope. It's going to start from the billionaires and it's going to trickle down to everybody else into the marketplace, especially as billionaires. Because if you look at some of the trading numbers, hedge funds and billionaires, they've been, reducing their trades in the financial markets because they were expecting, this massive sell-off in NASDAQ and the Dow Jones because of the Fed, removing the spike punch bowl. So yeah, I mean, that thing it's going to be a millionaire's tax, and there's going to be a six-figure tax, and before you know it, everyone's paying this tax on their unrealized capital gains.
All right, and the second question, won't these billionaires just restructure to avoid paying more?
I don't know about that because for one thing, a lot of these billionaires, they're left leaning. They like to, proclaim that the government is this almighty being. So, they're glad to pay their taxes. So I don't think, what Elon Musk, he's worth $300 billion and he paid the largest tax bill in the US history of $15 billion. Jeff Bezos, he loves government. He made a lot of money with all these government contracts. So I'm sure he'd go out and, say, hey, I love paying my taxes. So no, I'm Warren Buffett too. Warren Buffett, this guy's been going on for years about how we have to adopt the Buffett tax, and my receptionist is paying less in taxes than I do. So no, I don't think billionaires are going to restructure. Maybe they'll try to rework how the tax structure works for, let's say, their nonprofit organizations or their investments. But overall, no, I don't think.
Because I think a lot of people are worried that the any extra tax that they have to pay will be passed on to consumers of whatever products or services they produce.
Well, that's corporations. Yeah, that is correct, but that's more of a corporation's issue, not an individual billionaire's problem.
Okay, so giving this overall inflation plan, which we will get to inflation in just a moment, a realistic analysis, do you think what Biden has suggested will make life easier for struggling Americans or not?
Overall, no. And if I may go back quickly to that billionaires thing, that's not going to help people whatsoever. That's going to do more harm than good because let's say, all these billionaires I mentioned in my recent article, all these billionaires, they don't have their money inside of a bank account just sitting there. They have it invested in a lot of the stocks, a lot of small businesses, a lot of, nonprofit entities. If they liquidate some of their assets, that stock price is going to go down. You saw that Elon Musk, he liquidated a lot of his assets. That stock is down about 25%. Now, when it comes to the overall Biden plan, no, that's not going to do much at all. You already see, because all those policies have already been implemented, not much has happened. He released the 1 million barrels per day from the strategic reserves. Gas prices are all-time highs. These energy tax credits, people are paying astronomical prices for their utilities, not going to do much overall. Pharmaceuticals, that's going to lead more pharmaceutical price controls, that's going to lead to long-term consequences. There's so much that he's proposed that it's not really doing anything at all. So no, I don't think it's going to benefit anybody. Except it may create more of an inflationary aspect because it consists more of just spending more money, taxing a certain people, injecting it more into the economy. So yeah, so it's more of an inflationary aspect than anything else.
All right. Now, I can't let you escape without talking about the inflation. So the numbers came out earlier this week, 8.3%. And I guess we're seeing some people claim this is a victory because it's down. What's your analysis?
Yeah, I guarantee you Biden's he's gonna have a victory lap over this because it fell from 8.5 to 8.3%, the first time it declined since August 2021. But the only reason why it declined was because of China. Now, China, they're under lockdown, so that's that energy prices declining because of that. Used cars that also dipped. But overall, everything, the key aspects of that report are sky high. Food prices up 9.4%. The energy index up more than 30%, fuel oils up 80%. So everything that people need is what's really skyrocketing in that report. Look at the core inflation, for example. The core inflation report, which excludes of all volatile food and energy sectors, that was up. That was higher than what the market predicted. And actually, maybe one thing too about the market is that the market anticipated 8.1% reading, the headline reading, but it was at 8.3%. So you saw the market turn negative because of that.
Yeah, it seems that the stock market is having a bit of a tough time overall. Now, is both inflation likely to come down before the midterms to any significant degree, do you think?
It's hard to say. It may ease somewhat because the Fed has, taken its foot off the pedal. So it may ease, let's say, 7.5%. But it's still elevated because the key thing with inflation, especially when it's elevated, is that it's sticky. It's going to be there for a long time. So if it's at 8.5% or 7.5%, it doesn't really matter because a lot of people are still suffering in a high inflationary environment. And then the conceit and arrogance of the Federal Reserve saying that it can establish a neutral rate, it's befuddling because the Federal Reserve cannot know what a neutral rate is in the broader economy because it's not this omnipotent leviathan that know it all. It doesn't, because that's the problem with central banking and the central tenet of Keynesian economics is that they can pull the levers in the economy whichever way they want because they're these opiotheous individuals in the swamp.
Well, God bless the central planners because nobody else will. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
Later in the show, we talk liberty on why Democrats think bumping Republicans from the competition is a winning idea. But coming up next, we have a special Say What signature segment. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. We have a special treat for you next. Liberty Nation senior political editor, Tim Donner, with our signature Say What segment. Over to you, Tim, and thanks for being here.
Okay, Mark, thanks. And a lot of people on both sides of the decades-long abortion debate were likely saying say what themselves recently about both the unprecedented leak of the draft of a Supreme Court decision and that the decision would not just weaken, but overturn the landmark Roe versus Wade ruling, which has stood for almost 50 years. The left predictably went into a tirade, saying the sky is falling for women, doxing all the conservative Supreme Court justices to gin up protests outside their homes. And the 46th president refused to say a single discouraging word about the unprecedented protests, instead suggesting this decision is just the tip of the spear from the extremists who support Donald Trump.
What happens if you have a state changes the law saying that children who are LGBTQ can't be in classrooms with other children? Is that legit under the way that the decision is written? What are the next things that are going to be attacked? Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history.
Now, how this president would say overturning abortion on demand is a constitutional right relates to LGBTQ youth is befuddling at best, but we've come to expect that. But that didn't stop the hysterical rhetoric from the left from continuing. Senator Elizabeth Warren went on the rat hole known as The View and asserted that this decision will open up threats from every direction.
Now they've opened up the possibility of your contraception. Might be a contraception like an IUD that works after an egg is fertilized. That your miscarriage could be investigated by the local police, that you could be monitored, that you lifted a package that was too heavy and threatened a pregnancy.
Okay, if that wasn't hysterical enough for you, Warren's fellow Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar declared that this Supreme Court decision will unleash the Democratic vote in November because it sets the cause of women's rights back not just decades, but centuries.
The women of this country and the men who stand with them will vote like they've never voted before, because this is 50 years of rights in a leaked opinion where Justice Alito is literally not just taking us back to the 1950s, he's taking us back to the 1850s.
Even the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, got into the act, attacking the draft decision on the basis of a perverse, jaw-dropping assertion that while abortion on demand may take the lives of the unborn, it is good for the economy.
Eliminating the right of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades. Roe v. Wade and access to reproductive health care, including abortion, helped lead to increased labor force participation.
Yes, folks, she actually said that. The Treasury Secretary of the United States, aborting pregnancies leads to increased labor force participation. Do these people have any self-awareness, any at all? And when they weren't enraged like they always are about abortion, or doxing justices or holding vile protests in their peaceful neighborhoods, they were busy decrying the imminent outbreak of free speech on Twitter, attacking the man who bought the tech giant Elon Musk for daring to declare he will end censorship of the right on the platform he will soon own.
A petulant and not so bright billionaire casually bought one of the world's most influential messaging machines and just handed it to the far right.
His idea of freedom means freedom to be a jerk.
It's about free speech of straight white men.
That is from MSNBC and, of course, The View. So the left has now clearly come down almost universally on the side of speech codes, anathema to the First Amendment. Meanwhile, Joe Biden certainly continues to act dazed and confused about all of this, to the point of serious concern beyond any ideological considerations. Listen to this president rambling on about plans to take down Vladimir Putin's oligarchs.
I'm also sending to Congress a comprehensive package of that will enhance our underlying effort to accommodate the Russian oligarchs and make sure we take their ill-begotten gains. We're going to accommodate them. We're going to seize their yachts, their luxury homes, and other ill-begotten gains of Putin's kleptocracy and the guys who are the kleptocracies.
Most people don't find that type of incoherence in the leader of the free world to be funny. But we're told he won the election, so what are you going to do? Demand he be replaced by Kamala Harris? Meanwhile, as inflation continues to rage, still over 8%, despite a very slight drop in the last month, it's threatening the political future of most Democrats. And the heart of the problem may have been unwittingly revealed by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer when he almost spilled the beans on the Democrats' answer to inflation.
If you want to get rid of inflation, the only way to do it is to undo a lot of the Trump tax cuts and raise rates.
Did you hear that? He almost said raise taxes, then stopped himself, avoiding a gaffe, which in Washington parlance means accidentally telling an inconvenient truth. And while we're at it, here's another gaffe, and a breathtaking one at that. This is from the archive, but it perfectly expresses how the media views its role in the public sphere. This is from Mika Brzezinski on MSNBC discussing the dangers of Donald Trump.
He's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts. He could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think. And that is our job.
Yeah.
He might control exactly what people think. That's our job. Yeah. So, Mark, there it is. The most naked admission we've yet to hear of what elite corporate media sees as its ultimate goal. Back to you.
And thank you, Tim. Yes, I don't think anyone who's paid attention for the last few years is surprised that the legacy media believes it should have a stranglehold on our personal thoughts and opinions. Thanks again for being here. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Later in the show, it's Democrats against democracy. But up next, we talk Andy Warhol and Marilyn Monroe. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andy Warhol's Shot Sage Blue Marilyn picture of Marilyn Monroe sold recently for $195 million at Christie's, setting a record for art produced in the 20th century. Now, we're going to take a quick step back from politics and figure out what's happening in the art world. And to help us along with this, we're joined by award-winning artist, who is also the fantastic illustrator of Liberty Nation's sensational kids book, Pepe and Peter, Laura Gable. Thanks for being here, Laura.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
So the first question I got to ask is, why did the Warhol piece sell for so much? And is it because it's this particular piece where it's a picture of an American icon created by an American icon?
I think there are a lot of reasons that this particular painting sold as much as it did. First, silkscreen is a completely different medium. And of course, today people know all about silkscreens because Americans wear t-shirts constantly. But back then, that was a very different thing. And the way Warhol described it was you pick a photograph, you blow it up, you transfer it onto silk, you put an emulsion or a glue onto it. And he was so incredibly innovative, entrepreneurial. I think he raised the bar, really almost the zenith of innovative pop art at that point in time. And it really captures the fascination that America has with the beauty culture, if you will, Mark.
That brings me very nicely to my next question, because Warhol, he did pieces on a number of notable ladies of the day, Elizabeth Taylor, Jackie Onassis, Grace Jones, of course, and of course Marilyn Monroe, who we're just talking about now. It's almost as if he was an artist riding the wave of the culture of the times, and that's something that few others have really managed to do. What do you make of it?
I think he created the culture of its time. I think that America has always had that, of course, fascination with beauty, idols, if you will, and the genre of portraiture. And this particular piece shouts outlandish because of the coloring. It screams America. Really, Warhol described his paintings as, this is a quote, if you want to know all about Andy Warhol, just look at the surface of my paintings, the films, and me. And there I am, and there's nothing behind it. But that there couldn't be anything farther from the truth, Mark. Everything is behind it. Warhol himself, when he was young, contracted a disease. And that disease created a lot of imperfections in his physical appearance. And so he was constantly obsessed with beauty, with his skin, with his physical flaws. And so what does he do? He raises the bar in terms of beauty in America so that everyone, again, very mass-produced, which was unusual.
Well, that brings me very nicely. I was going to ask about mass production here. So he was well known for making art in a very mass-produced way that was almost unheard of. Nowadays, though, so much of the art that we see coming out, it's digital and transportable in its format. And that is really very, very suited to the kind of lives that we lead now, with so much happening online. So do you think that the growth towards this more digitized and mass production and mass distribution art, was Warhol a pioneer of this, or was it part of a greater American tradition that started with Henry Ford and has now reached its pinnacle almost, with people living virtually in different parts of the world?
I think it's both of those things, Mark. I think that, you've heard the phrase, art imitates life and life imitates art. Well, here we have, Henry Ford and Warhol saying, I want to mass produce it. I want to make it available for everyone. And of course, inherent in that is the entrepreneurial part that just speaks of America. We want to do things mass production wise. So even from the very beginning with Ford, now here we have Warhol, and he's saying, yeah, let me make art so everybody can see it, and let me make it outlandish, and let me make it beautiful, and let me make it strange, and all of those great things. And so I do definitely think he was a pioneer.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that it did reach that $200 million price tag is that the Marilyn picture, it's one of the most recognizable images in modern culture, that there's hardly anybody who hasn't just caught a glimpse of it. So, or the style of what's happening there, it almost seems familiar if you haven't even seen that particular production. Do you think that played a role in pushing the price tag up?
Because it is so well known, Mark.
Yes.
No, I don't. I just think it is iconic in its. I mean, think back in '62 and in '64. That kind of art was not really well known. And again, silkscreen printing was not very well known. So there are many reasons, I think, that drove the price up. And in particular, just the idea of the garishness, I think was very exciting back in '62. And people want that. And they long for something different. They're always raising the bar. What's different? What's different? What's different? And I think that that's what drove the price up because it was so different back in '62.
Yeah, I suppose you're right there. And of course, it is a piece of history to be the first popular production made in that way and then distributed to so many. So one final question for you, if I may, Laura. And it's about art today. So is traditional art, is it getting the same attention that it used to? Or is it more of a focus on, let's call it performance art or internet and entertainment, movies and music? Are these the new realms of art? Or I guess what I'm asking is, what place does traditional art, even traditional from 1962, have in today's culture?
It's interesting to use the word traditional in regards to this particular painting. And I love the fact that it sold for close to $200 million because the attention that places on, shall we say, art and art that has been custom made says people still value that. And I think that's an important fact because in today's world, everyone can produce an awful lot of art, but something that is, just beautifully made. And really, this was a very thought through piece, Mark. Over and over, he painted it to get the kind of colors that he wanted. But when you look at 200 million, you can say to yourself, okay, what's worth 200 million? You can buy this incredible piece of art. You can buy 26 miles of interstate highway for 200 million. You can buy a wedding, two Mumbai weddings for $200 million. Which would you rather have, the interstate, the wedding, or this incredible painting? And that's the focus that, the pricing of this particular piece. What it says is art matters. It really matters. People think it's important still.
I'm very glad to hear that. Now, Laura, could you tell our listeners where they can check out some of your art? What's the best place to go and have a look?
They can go to lgabel.com.
All right, that's perfect. Laura, thank you ever so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Coming up next, we talk liberty with Scott Cosenza. What's the end game of Democrats' plans to remove GOP candidates from the ballot? Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Federalism, search and seizure, and Democrats out to destroy democracy, apparently. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We're delving into the hot legal takes of the week on our special Talking Liberty segment with constitutional attorney and host of the excellent Uprising podcast that you can find at all good podcast providers, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. A pleasure as always.
So, Scott, the first story I want to talk about this week is Democrat politician efforts to ban GOP candidates from running for office. Tell me, this is crazy, right?
Unsuccessful efforts, we might add. That is
Absolutely.
Actually the news story, is that the latest one of these in Arizona has now failed. There's been some activity in North Carolina, in Arizona, and in New Jersey, I think, as well. And this has been well reported by Jonathan Turley, who I know you appreciate as I do, talking about how it's, of course, a double standard. If there were no double standards. The
There'd be no
Democrats,
standards at all. Yeah.
exactly, and they want to remove these representatives from being able to run for re-election. Now, their stated reason is that they believe that they're disqualified from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which is a dormant sort of provision that provides that basically it was included in there to say that if you took up arms against the United States in the Civil War, you couldn't then run for office. And they're trying to use that, and again, unsuccessfully each and every time, to disallow representatives from running for office. It's obviously much easier to defeat somebody if you're not if you don't allow them to run at all, Mark. It's certainly a strategy for success if you can win that right in the courts, but they're losing it. And of course, I guess, I don't know, is it beating it over the head to suggest that it's preposterous to suggest that they're for democracy, which we hear about all the time, and yet at the same time wish to
take the democratic vote away from the people. I mean, that's the big deal about these cases that have been tried so far for me, is that it seems that they're not willing or not confident enough to face these people at the ballot box. And therefore they're trying to get the courts to intercede.
The rules are important to the extent that they provide a fair playing field for Democrats to win. But if they give an edge to the Republicans, or somehow that frustrates their attempt for power, it seems like with this and other issues, like threatening violence at the home of somebody, for instance, maybe, or some other things where exceptions need to be made for Democrats to succeed electorally, Mark, and that's where we have it.
Now, what were the reasons given by the judges for the Democrats losing these cases? Was there one overarching theme that they pointed out?
The one in that the Arizona Supreme Court talked about, I happen to be more familiar with that than the other two justifications, is that it's for Congress to decide who's allowed to sit for Congress, not for state actors to basically petition the state governance to. Those qualifications are under the Constitution and federal law set by the congresspersons themselves. So they may say, for instance, even though it's not in the Constitution, that if you have multiple felonies for fraud, you're not going to be seated as a member of Congress. Now, that's for the congresspersons to decide. And the same thing could be true with a genuine, I think, insurrection like the Civil War, which, of course, is what this law contemplated rather than the violence that took place on January 6th.
Now, I know you hate to get too speculative, Scott, but if these cases had succeeded,
is it likely? Magic 8 ball. I don't see it on the desk.
your magic 8 ball is with you in your mind, Scott. And I don't want any ask again later answers here, please.
Right. But reply hazy.
Yeah, reply hazy. So if these cases had won at the courts for whatever reasons, is it beyond the realms of possibility that they would have tried to use those rulings to deny Donald Trump the option to run in 2024?
Well, I think, of course, yeah. And by the way, just because they lost, don't think they still won't try. They may try again. They may try in other state courts, and maybe they'll get a win. Certainly, the New Jersey courts are not a Republican's dream come true. So at least one state that you'd presume would be hostile to Republicans generally and want to support whatever the Democrat way of thinking of it would be, didn't pass muster there. So,
okay, we'll keep checking back in on this, because I think that as we get to the other side of 2022, the congressional elections, I think we're going to see a lot more challenges this, because 2022 is important, but 2024 is the big show for them. So, Scott, another story that I want to discuss is this.
Mark, this doesn't nearly approach the level of desperation that we'll see after the midterms, when the only election that, in their prominence that will be before them will be the presidential election and perhaps Donald Trump's reelection. So I couldn't agree more.
These shenanigans are the mere appetizer before the main course. Now, so, Scott, another story that I wanted to have a look at was about a California sheriff who has agreed to stop stealing from the citizens. Care to tell us more?
Well, this is about a San Bernardino County sheriff named Shannon Dicus, who directed his officers to seize and take over $1 million worth of money from marijuana stores. Basically, what happens is because marijuana is federally illegal, those stores can't use the normal banking systems. They can't often take credit cards, and they have to deal in all sorts of workarounds because of the weird system we have with marijuana being legal in certain states and illegal federally. And there's been an agreement to not prosecute, and by an agreement, I mean an attorney's general letter that was in place at the Obama administration, and with a short period of divergence also in place during the entirety of Trump's presidency, and we presume also now during the Biden presidency. And what it said was that if people were operating legally under state law, they would not be molested by federal law enforcement, even though the law is in place, in order to allow for our kind of dual system and the dual laws which exist in it. So that wasn't good enough for Sheriff Dicus, though, and they just started seizing all this money from these, basically, like, for lack of a better term, an armored car or cash transport for these marijuana businesses. And the reason why they were doing it, Mark, as best we can tell, is because they were going to get paid back by the federal agencies on the back end. So what happens is, a lot of times
the sheriff's office submits the money to the federal government. The federal government then pays them the money that they've seized in the form of forfeiture.
That funds. Is the burlesque, Mark. The idea that the sheriffs have seized the money when in fact they haven't. They've grabbed it, and as soon as they can, they pass it off to a federal authority because they would not be permissible or advisable for them to do so. And then the federal authority kicks it back to them. Well, that wasn't good enough for MP Real is the name of the company involved, and they hooked up with, to their benefit, the Institute for Justice, who filed a federal lawsuit on their behalf. And I've been following the progress of the federal lawsuit, and this cuts that lawsuit short because the sheriff has agreed to stop stealing the money.
It's very decent.
It's funny because if you took over $1 million, you'd have a damn good reason for it, right? And you wouldn't soon give it back without an issue. But that's what's happened here. So they haven't had what I think needs to happen, which is an investigation into the reason for the seizures in the first place. And of course, because it's federally prohibited to deal in marijuana or its proceeds, there couldn't be what would be if this were a non-marijuana issue, which is, of course, a civil rights investigation into San Bernardino sheriff behavior, basically.
And was this an isolated incident? Was this one sheriff going rogue?
It seems to be, Mark. I've looked and have not found any other sheriffs in California or law enforcement generally. We have seen cases where law enforcement in states that have marijuana prohibition that are adjacent to marijuana permissive states direct their law enforcement, like pull over people as they drive through the state and that sort of thing. But this is an entirely different situation, and it is, I think, a one-off, and good news and good riddance that it seems to be over.
Well, the most well-funded sheriff's department in California will have their own say in this, I'm sure. Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Cheers, Mark.
And that's almost it for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran, Tim Donner, Laura Gable, and Scott Cosenza. And of course, thank you, the listeners out there. You are appreciated. My final thought for this week. In the marketplace of ideas, it is the best proposition that wins through. When politicians resort to banning opponents from entering the concept arena, it's not because they wish to uphold some sacred standard. It's because they know that deep in their hearts, their ideas are just not up to the challenge. They fear that the power they have garnered will be stripped away because they understand on some fundamental level that they're not delivering on their promises. And that's the temptation of voters to opt for their opponents. It's more than just possible, it's likely. The sad fact is that in reality, if they're not willing to defend their ideas in the court of public opinion, they shouldn't even be playing the game in the first place. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and others.
I can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.